Welcome to Raw Green. I am Francesco De Lieto here with Emma Me. Today we're joined by Nick Wise, founder of OceanMind and co-founder of Climate Trace. Nick, welcome to Raw Green.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
Welcome, Nick. So to anyone that's new to OceanMind, what are you actually doing?
So OceanMind is a non-profit organisation. We are a new kind of organisation. We are very data and tech-led, but we have this non-profit mission. We use things like satellites and artificial intelligence to see what people are doing on the ocean. We can see where they're doing bad things that harm the ocean, and our main work is to work with authorities to stop that harm from happening. So we'll find bad things, help interdict, we will help set up rules and regulations that prevent, and we'll deliver intelligence that allows governments to act more effectively against non-compliance with regulations.
Okay, that's interesting. So seeing it as a pipeline, just go into the next level of detail then. What are you using? How are you getting the data? What is the data coming into you? And what do you infer from that data? And then how do you score it? And ultimately, what sort of decision does it ultimately enable?
Oh, how long have we got? So
about 45 minutes.
I'll go fast then. We use everything we can lay our hands on. So the idea is that there is now so much data and information out there that you can use to understand what's happening to our planet. The satellites are gathering petabytes, which is massive amounts of data every single day. And there's images of the whole planet's surface. There's different types of satellites that use radar to probe the surface and see what's happening. There's listening satellites listening for radio signals from the surface. So we have all of this kind of data that you can collect, and then inside things like those radio packets I mentioned, there will be more data, like GPS positions of ships, for example. And so there's a massive industry out there of people who are gathering all of that data. And then there is another massive industry of people out there trying to make sense of the data. And so they will pull lots of different bits of interesting things out. There's a ship in this picture, for example, or this radar return indicates there's a boat and it's in this moving in this direction. Or here is a GPS position from a ship, for example. And oftentimes they can say which ship as well, because it's all part of the radio signal that's received. And so we gather information, both raw data from the satellites directly. So we might use government satellites, for example, where the data is free, but it's very raw. Or we might buy data from commercial providers where they've already done some interpretation of it for us, and we can look at where they think ships are. Or we will work with partners who have systems that start to pull all of that together and start to show trends of information, like, for example, Global Fishing Watch. Or there are other tooling providers that allow you to look at different data sets in context, like Skylight. We gather from all of those different data sources, and then we cross-reference it with a database of the vessel identity. So which vessel is which, how do you tell? And licensing information. So, for example, if it's a fishing vessel, where can they fish? How can they fish? Under what conditions can they fish? And we put all of that in a big bag of data in the cloud, and we run our own custom AI analytics across it to try and find where the most important bad things are happening. And then we focus our analysts' attention. So we have technical staff who do all of that data munging, and we have analyst staff who themselves have been involved in marine law enforcement and know what to do. They look through all of the outputs, and then they compile the information so that it is readily understandable by the person who's actually got to do the job.
What are you catching people out doing? The illegal activity?
There is a great deal of overfishing activity or unreported fishing. So you'll hear the term illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing, which is an umbrella around many of the ways that you can fish and be harmful. And so illegal's obvious. There's a law and you have directly broken it. And so that's pretty straightforward. Unreported is also illegal. But what it means is that you have failed to report all of the fish that you've caught, usually within a quota system, and therefore you are in breach of your quotas. You've taken too much, basically. And then unregulated is that there are actually no rules anyway, and this happens fairly frequently on the high seas. And so unreported fishing is probably the most common activity, and it is lots of small slices, but together they undermine food systems.
I've read an incredible stat around this, Nick, that 1 in 5 fish caught globally, it is unreported or unregulated under the IUU. So we're talking about between 16 to 18 million tons a year. This is the FAO numbers. So basically, it's not little. It's like a parallel supply chain. 1 in 5. It is huge.
It is huge. And so a few things on that number. One, it's quite old. It might be worse now.
Fantastic.
When it was measured, it was the best estimate that could be put together at the time, but it hasn't been updated in a while. But it's the best we've got to work with. It's important to note that it's not a even distribution, so it's not that's happening everywhere all the time. So in some places, the rates of IUU catch can be 50%, for example, and in other places it might be much lower. So the challenge comes within specific regions or specific food systems where this amount of catch can be undermining and actually puts food security for people at risk. And oftentimes that relates to either weakly enforced regions or large scale fishing. So where there's just so much fishing happening that small increments actually add up to a huge amount.
Well, that leads me to one of my following questions, which is where is the bottleneck here? You mentioned enforcement, but there is money, there is politics, there is corruption, or it's just physics, because the ocean it is big. But with all of these technologies like OceanMind, I mean, you should be able now to reduce the number, not to increase.
Yeah. So the problem is one of scale. And so if we imagine that OceanMind and the others working in the ecosystem have reached the scale where we're affecting fish globally, what that means is that there will be equal levels of enforcement all around the world. And if that is true, then it will be much harder to land and import illegally caught fish. The issue is that actually at the moment that it isn't even, it's very widely different in different, not even in different countries, but different ports in the same country. And so if one port has identified that a catch is illegal and they don't allow the catch to be landed, the vessel will just go to another port where they know the controls are less strong, and carry on. And so unless you are interrupting or disrupting the sort of IUU supply chain at scale, actually you're having no impact. And so there is this period of time, this transitionary period of time, during which we're helping to bring up the capability and capacity of governments to more readily enforce against these activities, where things are just being pushed around. But after a certain tipping point, will actually start to have a major impact on the supply chains, because there won't be that chink into which you can then import fish.
Mamma mia.
So does this global oceans treaty that we've seen come into effect now, Nick, does that help in terms of the legislation or the global approach to overfishing, illegal fishing and others?
So kind of. So the idea of the new treaty, which is the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty, sometimes called the High Seas Treaty, but that sort of then takes your attention away from the fact that it's about the biodiversity and the marine resources. But the key point about that is to help protect large areas of the ocean. So a few years ago, the global community came together at the biodiversity COP, and they came to the agreement that we needed to protect 30% of the planet, land and sea, in order for us to be able to halt the biodiversity decline, because we are going through a great extinction phase. We are seeing massive declines in biodiversity everywhere. And only by protecting 30% of the planet do we think that we can halt that decline and actually stabilize ecosystems. So on the ocean, protecting 30% necessarily means you must start to protect the high seas.
Yeah, over the 12 miles, yes.
Yeah. And the key point about high seas is that beyond national jurisdiction point. Who is responsible? Who agrees that they should be protected? Who comes together to actually facilitate that protection? So it was a United Nations-led activity from that point of view, but driven by all sorts of groups and organizations and supporters and tireless people working tirelessly to actually have it come about, because these things do not happen naturally. It took huge amounts of very hard work and campaigning and supporting and driving to get it to where it is today, which is now in force. That the treaty is now in force. Possibly one of the shortest turnaround treaties that I've seen. So
shortest turnaround. It's been a couple of decades, hasn't it?
It has, but look at other major UN treaties, particularly when it comes to things like the law of the sea and whether we agree on things like trade is we take a very long time to agree these things, and then even once they come into agreement, then the process of actual ratification and coming into force can take some significant time, and this time the ratification to come into force has really been amazing to see.
It has. It's notable
I got some data on that. The time frame are absolutely to what you were saying, Emma. So for foundational law of the sea, okay, like the UNCLOS, for example, negotiations started in 1973. The convention was adopted in 1982 and entered into force in 1994. So it's 21 years, almost a generation to do that. Then more light like the IMO amendments that can take 18, 24 months. But I was staggered when I read those numbers. It takes 21 years to get something done. But when you have to put 200 plus countries together, that kind of makes sense.
It does.
We're not there yet, because we've still got the US, we've still got India and Russia. They haven't ratified it yet. And of course, there may be a few more years of political change to happen before some of them come on play.
Well, and that's the thing. It needed 60 signatures to ratify, and it got there. But the point is, therefore, that is still a minority of countries in the world.
Yeah.
And it has significantly grown since that trigger point was reached in September last year, I think it was. But the point is, there's still a lot of work to do to bring other people along. Also, now there's the added question of, well, what do you do? Now it's in force, what to do? Because
exactly
it gives
what
you
I was going to ask you, Nick. Yes.
But the framework needs to actually be implemented, put into action. And a big problem is it costs money. It costs quite a lot of money to actually manage and sort of get this whole thing working. So finance has been a major focus of quite a few of these organizations. And actually, they've made huge progress in coming up with new financing models for the high seas and for ocean protection in general. Blended finance models are now fairly standard. That is, bringing public and private funds together, enabled by philanthropy. So these sorts of finance programs, innovative finance programs, have been just as important as satellites in the sky or AI. The people who've come up with ways of distributing funds and managing those have been just as hard at work.
So you've got the rules, you've got the governance sort of framework and structure, you've got the ability to enforce these rules with OceanMind, you've got the money. You've told me some great stories in the past, Nick, of actual activities on the ground or on the water, as we should say, with stories of chasing fishing boats basically across the seas. Tell me, what have you seen while you've had your eyes in the sky looking at all of this activity?
Well, I mean, there's so much that's happening on the ocean. There's so many vessels out there. There's so many different trades happening. So you've got all your shipping, the huge amount of movement around the ocean relating to fossil fuels. We mapped all of that. But the key is that when you find something, how do you work out whether it's something you should pay attention to in amongst the vast scheme of everything else? And then when you have found something, what do you actually do? Because most of the time, we do have these jurisdictional issues. There isn't necessarily a patrol boat nearby ready to go and grab someone if they've done something wrong. So there is this almost hot pursuit across the ocean that crosses many countries and the high seas, where you're not actually there. You're using satellites and you're monitoring things. There was one a few years back now, but there was a known illegal vessel spotted in the waters of one of the British overseas territories in the Antarctic region, and that prompted a rapid response to try and get satellite observations onto that vessel so it could be tracked. So there was another vessel nearby, and they spotted someone who shouldn't have been there, radioed the authorities, and then the authorities who were working with us came and asked for imagery to work out what was happening. So we started tracking this vessel. So it started in the Antarctic, and it then started to proceed its way across through the Atlantic, round past south of Africa. It went up. At one point, it took port in East Africa, and it looked like it could be caught, but then it made a run for it. There was a point at which a Sea Shepherd vessel was chasing it for a while. It basically travelled almost halfway around the world in order to try and escape notice, turning its transmitters on and off to try and confuse people. But eventually, it was tracked into Indonesian waters. This whole thing, incidentally, because it is international, was being managed by Interpol. So Interpol's at the centre, working with all the countries that the vessel's moving through. And eventually it got into Indonesian waters, and the Indonesian Navy was ready for it. They were waiting for it to come. And then a number of organisations like OceanMind, where we were all working together, we got the data in sort of near real-time tracking, and they vectored in on the vessel and caught it. And,
so it's a high-speed chase over what time period?
Weeks, if not months. Definitely weeks. So things don't happen that fast on the ocean. So vessels aren't moving that quickly, but then your response isn't that quick when it's right out in the open ocean. And
just
also
costing gasoline. Yeah.
I mean, exactly the types of different types of fuel that you've got to use and how much you have to burn to get there. And that brings us on to emissions, which is a whole other story. But the idea that you can track a vessel as it moves around the world, even when it turns its own tracking systems off and tries to hide, using all of the satellites that are available, because there's now thousands and thousands of satellites in orbit, all of which that you can go and try and tap and get a bit of information from just to build the picture. And of course, if you try to use everything, A, it's far too much data to look at, but B, massively expensive. So you have to pick and choose what you need at the time in order to cost effectively do this work. But it is entirely possible now to see what's going on, and for people to be unable to escape.
And you've found some interesting things on these boats when they have finally got caught, haven't you?
Yeah, so I mean, in this case, as is regularly the case for high seas fishing, it seems, the crew were bonded labourers, so effectively modern slaves, and they were being treated very badly. And crew often on fishing vessels get beaten. It's been well documented that dissenting crew can be murdered and thrown over the side. So it's
Jesus.
not a great life being on one of these distant water vessels, I have to say. Well, one of these kind anyway. And so, yeah, the captains, I think, were and the operators were sentenced in Indonesia not longer back, actually. And the crew eventually were freed, and the illegal catch, I think, was destroyed. And this was at the time when Indonesia were blowing up illegal fishing vessels as well. So they'd caught several vessels coming into their waters to illegally fish, and they, boom, blew them up quite spectacularly.
Wow.
How does people keep getting trapped into that?
Well, I mean, you have to recognize that even in developed nations like ours, migrant labor forces are significant parts of the economy. And so people get recruited as essentially a low-cost migrant laborer. And this is like all around the world.
Yeah.
And some of those recruiters are unscrupulous and not legitimate. And they will get people to sign a contract that then means that they owe all of their wages to the recruiter for having got them the job, and all sorts of other dodgy things that go on. And so there are attempts to try and stamp this out in supply chains, and particularly the more resourced supply chains can do things like audits and checks and make sure. But the problem is a lot of these vessels are well out of sight, out of mind. There are many vessels that fish, particularly for tuna, which is high value, on the high seas, that don't go back to port for years. Literally, they will be sailing around fishing, and they offload their fish onto a carrier vessel at sea, transshipment, and then the carrier vessel goes and sells the fish while the fishing vessel carries on and does more fishing. And that's an entirely legitimate way of making maximum efficiency out of the vessel, but it's very easy to hide that you're abusing a crew when that's happened, because how do you inspect? How do you verify?
Numbers from the ILO say at least 128,000 victims of forced labor just in the fishing industry. I mean,
yep.
It's incredible.
When you consider that there are millions of fishers, it's still a high percentage of people who are experiencing some form of abuse in their work.
So that brings me on to ask Nick, then obviously there's clear reasons why the governments that you work with are going to be interested in what you do, but how about the private sector? What do businesses focus on, and what conversations have you had?
So labour is a particularly difficult issue for business. So it's retailers in particular who are sort of at the top of the supply chains. The problem that they face is the supply chains are usually quite long and very opaque, which is exactly the problem that everyone's found with things like Scope 3 emissions in climate calculations as well. Like, they don't actually know the whole process that go on in their supply chains. So many businesses, like the really big ones, the sort of major retailers that we would know of, have spent years investing in trying to understand these supply chains and trying to find out where they can put things into them to try and understand that this is happening, and not buy the fish from the vessels that are doing bad things. We even did some work in Thailand a few years ago to create a system where you could verify that a vessel was fishing legally, so that when it went into the supply chain, that knowledge could go with the data and get passed on through traceability systems. So it is possible. It is a very complex environment to work in, but as long as you have a clear ability to trace from the point of catch of the fish, with knowledge of the vessel and some knowledge of the crew, and some characteristics around how that crew are being treated, particularly around things like pay, being able to analyze that and use algorithms to work out where the most risk comes from. And then you can pass that through the supply chain, and obviously you can have a risk appetite and decide, no risk, problems with taking that position, of course, or where will I draw the line? I say problems because if you say I will accept no risk, there is also the problem that you are potentially penalizing legitimate small scale or smaller scale fishers whose livelihood depends upon being able to sell to the West, but they just can't afford all of this infrastructure to demonstrate that they've done it right. And that is probably one of the big dilemmas in this whole thing, not punishing the legitimate people for the actions of the bad people.
The question is, how worth are the certifications that we see from fish products?
Well, I think as you're aware, there's a lot of criticism of these certifications, in the sense that particularly in poorer fisheries, they don't necessarily have the ability to afford to put in place the certifications, which means that they don't get market access. Certifications essentially have become a baseline for purchasing, but they are usually one-off audits, and the problem with a one-off audit or a semi-regular audit is you can tell that there's infrastructure in place to be able to do a good job, but you can't verify that everyone is doing that good job on a daily basis. And so there have been situations where certified fisheries between certifications have been proven to be doing things that are not sustainable and in breach of the general overall certification. So the accusation then is that the certification is not worth it. My point of view is that the certifications are absolutely worth it, but not everywhere, not for everything. There needs to be other things as well, because they're not inclusive, but they do allow a certain level of demonstration of capability to be made, but they are definitely not the final indicator that all good things are happening and a fishery is sustainable.
Well, but if you mentioned a retailer earlier, right? They're at the top of the food chain, let's say, commercial supply chains. If you were a retailer that wants to do the right thing, okay, what are the 3 checks that matters the most?
I think there's several things that you can do. So first of all, you want to have some checks that make sure that wherever you're buying the fish from, the crew on those vessels are being paid properly and have the right kind of contracts. And so there's quite a few organizations working on how do we put that kind of capability in place, respecting people's privacy, but also then protecting livelihoods. Another check is to make sure that you get all of the data you need from those suppliers to verify that the fish was caught correctly. So there are techniques called electronic monitoring, which range from just tracking where the vessel is and getting position reports so that you can see where the vessel was when it was fishing, all the way up to having cameras on the boats and having a full HD video feed of everything that's going on. Obviously, at one end, it's a little information poor, and at the other end, it is massively information rich, and how do you manage all of that? So there are challenges in understanding that. But OceanMind has worked in that sort of information poor space for some time, and it's still possible to analyze just those vessel movements with machine learning and work out where it should have been fishing, cross-reference that with logbook information, cross-reference again with how much is claimed to have been caught of what type of fish where, and actually work out, is that likely? Could they have done that? Is that the right place to have caught? And then also look at other things. So are they also fishing elsewhere and they didn't declare that they were doing so? That adds risk to to everything. The idea is to build up this picture of risk over time.
Yeah.
That gives you a more or less likely was this to be fish caught in line or not in line with the rules.
Mamma mia. So what is it's a lot to digest because we live sometimes when you go and buy fish products, you have those very well-known standards that they work as a reassurance but it's only valid if there is all these exercises that are done behind the stages, right? Which not always happens. And I also understand the complexity. You cannot ask a small, fishery to spend all that kind of money investing to blockchain, for example. That would definitely help onto the traceability part of it. My next big thing to ask you would be, what's the biggest false reassurance that people normally buy into?
That's interesting. So I think certifications in general are an efficiency thing. They're a shortcut to be able to say someone's tried, essentially. And so people lean on that as a kind of crutch to say, well, I've tried to be responsible because I chose the certified tin of tuna over the uncertified. The problem with that is that actually it's much harder to work out whether you are buying better in sustainability and responsibility terms tuna, and you have to know more. And the problem is that people choose not to educate themselves in general about what's actually happening. And of course, it's really difficult. If you tried to do that for everything you bought, you'd spend your whole life trying to learn about that, and you're trying to rely on people for this. But it is a bit of a sort of false situation, really, where people are relying on things. They're being presented as reliable, but actually the situation is much more complicated than that. You mentioned blockchain, for example. It is all too easy for people to not fully understand blockchain and believe that because it's in use, it's solved all the trust problems. And the thing is, blockchain is just a database. It just has some special properties around being distributed and having those kind of immutability chains and being able to prove certain things. But that doesn't mean you can't do that with other databases. It's more the question of, do you need decentralized or centralized data? If you're a supply chain, you can entirely work with a centralized database because you can be the person that owns the database and you can trust it. The big issue with both types of data base and how you work them is the old-fashioned software principle of garbage in, garbage out. As in, if you don't put reliable data into the system, well, what you get out is unreliable data. And this is a common misconception that somehow software can turn unreliable data into magic good data that tells you good things.
Yeah, that's true. You still have
which
that
you
input problem. Yeah.
And so pretty much all the problems are people problems, not technology problems.
I'm reassured to hear that. I lose the will to live sometimes when I think, or at least when I go down the supermarket, to be honest, and I see everything on the shelves. It seems like everything is unsustainable in its true form, and there seems to be nowhere to go. Farmed salmon versus, wild salmon, these kind of things are just impossible to navigate in this space. I mean, do you have any faith that we're going in the right direction? Is this going to get better?
That's the question, isn't it? Do I have faith? You have to have faith, because if you don't, why carry on? I think you have to have faith that we can improve things even step by step. I think it is a great challenge. I think there are absolute parallels between this sort of biodiversity anchored challenge and the climate challenge, and broader challenge of inequality in general, which actually underpins a lot of these other problems. I mean, it's interesting. Did you see the UK government report that was recently released, previously suppressed, recently released, where UK intelligence chiefs identified that biodiversity loss was a major national security issue? And from the point of view of food security, our supply chains at the moment are not resilient. And if we carry on a 2-degree warming pathway, there's a fair chance that we will not be able to feed the current population.
Yes, I did see that. It was conveniently launched on a busy news day, so actually got buried when it first came out, didn't it?
I didn't.
The right people have found it. Yeah, we'll share it, Francesco. It's it's what you know already. It doesn't provide much glimmer of hope. On that note, Nick, let's ask you about deep sea mining. That's in the headlines at the moment as well. Talking about that if it goes ahead, what do you feel is possible at the bottom of the ocean to be measured, that your satellites aren't going to work there? Who is in position to start working in that space, and with what sort of transparency that you think of?
So I think the whole point of deep sea mining is to avoid transparency, personally.
Right.
Okay.
We can observe some of what goes on the surface to infer what might be going on underneath, so that there are ways to look. But the thing is, it's a massive expense to go and extract minerals from the bottom of the ocean and potentially destroy things that we don't know about that are down there. Yet what we haven't yet done is fully expanded what we've already got in very easy reach on land. I think the main drive for even doing it is just politics. I don't have these things, I want them, so I will go and look in the ocean to find them. I don't really think there is a good, realistic commercial viability argument for deep sea mining, personally. So I think the people that are doing it because they have very particular personal reasons for wanting to do it, rather than it will help provide resources that are needed by humanity.
There is already an entire
Okay.
recycling infrastructure that needs to be developed on those critical materials that are needed for the energy transitions. I mean, the maths is there. Okay, you need to increase copper production. You need to bring down pricing. I don't think that is the best way to bring down pricing at all, without even factoring in the environmental impacts. Okay, which we know nothing about it, basically nothing, and on a portion of planet that is pretty big. So monitoring there, it is going to be something extremely expensive if done properly. Otherwise, yes, you have to do a shitty job and it's not done well, and we will never know properly the consequences of that. Sorry, I'm turning red, and the rage, it is growing.
Well, I will differ with you on one small point, which is I think we will know the consequences, because the consequences will always come back and get us.
Yes.
I think we're living through times right now that are the result of unforeseen consequences. And humanity has proven that it is not good at foreseeing the consequences, or even caring about those consequences, even when they are foreseen, of course. So I don't hold out any hope that we will be restrained in this case, because I think the drive to do things is far greater for the individuals who have power than the risks that are associated with it for everyone else.
Nick, while we're sort of on it, tell us the story of the excavation of metals that you found.
Well, so this is around wrecks, particularly World War and World War II wrecks, so metal
Shipwrecks?
Shipwrecks, yes, yeah. So under the ocean, and many of these wrecks, particularly from the wartime, are actually war graves, and sort of undersea cultural heritage. I was going to say protected, but of course they're not protected in many cases. Many of them are actually overseas, where our ships sank elsewhere. So one example is the HMS Prince of Wales, I think it is, Prince of Wales, and this was a ship that sank in Asia, and there is a huge market for this scrap metal from ships, and so
Why?
Metal is extremely valuable now, and there was this idea that the metal on these ships is pre-nuclear, and so they are in some way pristine and therefore valuable for things like medical
You mean
devices and things.
pre sort of nuclear testing and things that they've been
Exactly.
doing since
So
the 70s or something?
Or even before. But the idea is that that was presented anyway is that because they're under the sea, they weren't subject to the fallout that is naturally now in our atmosphere. Because our atmosphere is now significantly more radioactive than it used to be because of all of the nuclear testing. And so the claim is you can't get metals that are not now tainted with some form of radiation, and as such, when you try and use them in things like medical things, they taint the results. How accurate that is has been debated, but the idea is it drove for a while salvors to illegally or unauthorizedly salvage those ships. So you end up with these rogue salvage vessels, big cranes on boats with a massive claw going and just grabbing bits of ship. And we've got videos of like just this whole destruction of this heritage that is also in many cases a war grave site. And this ship in question has completely vanished. Like the whole wreck has gone. It's all been taken. It was a British ship and British sailors, and it's gone now, gone. And this is happening all over where there are wrecks that are accessible. There are rogue salvage fleets. They go out, they steal the metal basically, and it gets taken to breaker yards in
I mean, the unit
nations.
economics per kilo of that metal must be incredible.
Well, it's absolutely worth their while in the sense that this is really a lot of metal on these ships, particularly a large warship, and so being able to obtain that metal at relatively low cost is lucrative for them, and it gets basically melted down and resold, and there's a big market for cheap metal where people aren't really looking at the origins of it. So we've been working with
about traceability, not only on the fish, but also the metals. Yeah.
But there is probably nothing that we buy for which there isn't a source that relies on either slave labor or abuse or some other form of thing. Many supply chains have these things baked in. In fact, in many supply chains, we couldn't have the things that we buy as cheaply as we buy them if it wasn't for the fact that someone was losing out within that chain. So the whole globalized economics doesn't work. Even when you think about the fact that it's excluding planetary impacts, the people impacts that are equally excluded from those calculations.
Mamma mia. As out of curiosity, has the downsizing of USAID and NOAA affected you?
Well, it has, because it's affected the whole sector. So the US used to be a major part of the international system for tracking, managing, enforcing, supporting, protecting all sorts of national resources around the world, and sort of protecting food security, health, all these things in developing nations. And this helped create stability. It helped create livelihoods and growth in these locations, made people proud to be able to stay and be part of their own culture and their own heritage. What's happened with the dismantling of that is a large part of those activities have now gone away. And so that has directly impacted people's health. I mean, you saw hospitals closing as a direct consequence, but in the fisheries space, there were projects that were helping create, for example, new supply chains for small-scale fishers. Freezer boxes, for example, that they could have on the shoreline, so that they could, when they brought their catch back, they could use the freezers. There was less wastage, but meant more value for them. All sorts of projects of that kind of nature, right up to the sort of large-scale national level projects, all of which are now kind of in disarray or gone. So it has impacted the sector significantly, because that infrastructure was important to the overall work that everyone was doing, and it sort of helped tie things together. So yes, it's being felt widely and around the world.
So, Nick, OceanMind's been over so much stuff already. I mean, we've just covered most of it in the last 45 minutes. It's incredible. What's next? What's the next beachhead for you as a company to focus on?
Well, so we are particularly interested in this idea that that if you want to drive change, the best place to start driving it is in the boardroom, and at that sort of executive level of business. So we are now looking at how can we take everything we've learned working with law enforcement and understanding the risks on the ocean, and start to bring that up into the businesses that were the cause of those problems in the first place, somewhere down their supply chain. And what can we now do to inform people so they can make better decisions about where they source, how they source, what they ask for when they source, and can we provide them with risk data that allows them to conveniently make those decisions. We're starting by looking at the insurance sector, because as a massively overlooked sector, it underpins everything that we do. If there is no insurance, there is no business. And so we're looking to work with insurance to provide data that will allow them to make better risk decisions. The dream is that if you are an organization that takes risks or doesn't manage your risks properly, so there is illegal fishing or labor abuse or overfishing or other things in your supply chain, then we would like your insurance premiums to be higher or not available to you, depending upon the severity. And if you can demonstrate that you are following best practices and that you're attempting to have sustainable behavior, then we would like your insurance premiums to be lower, and so you can actually do better business. So we'd like there to be a way for this sort of cost dynamic to work through, and that's going to be this year's sort of major area of focus.
I would add also another little multiplier, which is on brand damage. Where basically imagine, I don't know, food companies, cosmetic companies, fashion industry, that they caught into something like that. There, the damage, it is not in the order of few millions, it is in the order of billions of damages. So, and again, unfortunately, money talks, bullshit walks. So if you have that explained properly at boardroom level, say, maybe we should do something about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good, Nick. Wow, this was incredibly interesting. A little bit of anger rising for sure, but thank God there are realities like OceanMind that look after around that.
At the moment, the road ahead, if we keep walking forwards, leads to 2-degree warming. It leads to significant biodiversity loss. It leads to a world that is not designed for how humanity has evolved and the globalized systems that we've created. So the only thing that lies down that road really is widespread suffering for the normal person. But we have a fork off where we could actually make better decisions. We could reduce our emissions faster. We could choose to eat foods that put less pressure on the planet, foods that didn't exacerbate inequality. Because if we had a more equal spread of wealth around the world, actually more people can stand up for themselves rather than being dependent on other countries. And that is driving many of the problems. And so we have relatively simple choices that we could be making. And when I say we, what that really means is our politicians and our business leaders. Because although we, the consumer, can make choices to do the best we can, that is scratching the surface. That is exactly the delaying tactic that the damaging industries are using.
Yeah,
we need to vote with our money and with our votes for the people who are actually doing the right things, and we need to educate ourselves and buy the right things. We need to vote for people who are actually going to do the right things. But before all of that, we kind of need to know what the right things are. And that's really hard, particularly right now in this massive growth of disinformation. So there's challenging times ahead, but I still have hope that this is something we'll get over.
Fantastic. Then let's end it here on a high note. Thank you, Nick. It was fantastic to have you, really. And we'll catch up soon.
Thank you. It's been great to be
Thanks,
here.
Nick.
Talk soon.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Raw Green. If you made it this far, you probably enjoyed it. So don't forget to hit subscribe and follow our podcast. It's an awesome way to support our community. At Obi, we're all about research, life cycle assessment, and the green tech innovation. Stay in touch through our socials or visit our website. Links are ready for you in the description. Catch you in the next episode. Ciao!